Have you ever asked yourself, where does real love begin? Does it come from blood and family ties? Or from a fleeting moment where a heart is seen, truly seen, without needing to prove itself? The story below isn't a sweet love ballad, nor is it the rosy dream of someone born into abundance. It's the journey of a boy, cast out of his own home by his mother for being too much trouble, and a woman, a complete stranger, who chose to open her door, open her heart, and do something no one had to: love. Along the way, every crack in their hearts, both child and adult, was slowly stitched together by patience, forgiveness, and tears no one wanted to see. Take a few minutes to walk with them, from the first rainy day to the moment the boy finally says, "I've found home." It was a chilly afternoon, just before Thanksgiving. Franklin Grove Mall glowed with warm golden lights. Families bustled past, arms full of bags, kids pulling their parents toward the toy section. The air was thick with familiar holiday scents: buttered popcorn, cinnamon rolls, and the faint plastic tang of freshly unboxed merchandise. Among the crowd, Clara, a woman in her early 30s, slim, with dark brown curls tied neatly at the nape of her neck, stepped out of a home decor store. She carried no shopping bags, only a price list in one hand and a weary look in her eyes. Clara worked at a private nursing home on the outskirts of town, often covering overnight shifts to make ends meet. Today was her day off, but instead of resting, she was out looking for a chair, something supportive enough for her mother, who was recovering from a difficult hip surgery. Just as she entered the mall's main atrium, she heard it, a small sound, almost too soft to notice: crying. Not the tantrum of a spoiled child, but something quieter, heavier, stifled, lost. She turned instinctively. Under the escalator, beside an abandoned kiosk, sat a young boy curled up tightly. His dark hoodie was damp around the hem, eyes swollen red. He couldn't have been more than 10, hugging a worn backpack to his chest like it was all he had left. Clara approached slowly, careful not to startle him. She sat beside him, not too close, and didn't speak right away. "Are you okay?" Her voice was low and soft, warmed by the patience of someone used to listening to lonely seniors sharing stories they hadn't told in years. The boy gave a small nod, but the tears kept falling. After a moment he whispered, "I don't know where to go. She said if I came back without money not to bother coming back at all." A chill passed through Clara's coat, not from the air, but from the way those words sounded far too old for a child that young. She took a deep breath, looked at the boy, and in that moment, every shopping list, every personal concern faded quietly into the background. She didn't know what she was stepping into. But one thing was clear: today wasn't the day to walk away. Not this time. Moments later, Clara brought the boy to a quiet sitting area in the mall, a row of benches by the wall heaters. The warm light hit his face at an angle, revealing the dark circles under his eyes, and a small bruise near his jawline. Clara took off her knit scarf and gently wrapped it around his neck. "My name is Clara," she said softly. "What's yours?" The boy hesitated, then answered in a raspy voice, "Jason." "Jason, are you hungry?" He nodded. Without another word, Clara stood and returned 10 minutes later with a cup of hot chocolate and a sandwich from the food court. When she got back, Jason was still in the same spot, hands clenched tightly around his backpack straps, as if afraid someone might take it. She sat down beside him, holding the food out with both hands. Jason didn't say thank you, didn't smile, but his eyes were full of quiet gratitude. While he ate, Clara didn't press him with questions. She simply sat there, glancing at passers-by, some of whom looked at Jason like he didn't belong, like he didn't quite fit the glossy fabric of the holiday shopping scene. After a while, with most of the sandwich gone, Jason spoke again. "My mom said I had to find a way to make money. Otherwise, I was on my own. Last night, I took a little cash from her wallet. She caught me, slapped me, threw my bag out the door, said, 'Go wherever you want, just don't come back.'" Clara felt something twist in her chest. She'd spent years working with the elderly. She had seen broken families, neglected lives, but never had despair spoken so clearly through the voice of a child. She asked gently, "Do you have a dad?" Jason shook his head. "I don't know who he is. My mom never said." At that moment, Clara felt something strange, not pity, but deep understanding, because she too had grown up in a house where yelling was easier than listening, where love always came with a price tag. She knew what it felt like to be unwanted, unchosen. A few minutes later, Clara asked softly, "Jason, do you have anywhere to sleep tonight?" The boy stayed silent. His lips trembled. Finally, he gave a small shake of his head. "Then you're coming with me tonight," Clara said firmly. "I don't know what I can do yet, but I won't let you sleep on a bench." Jason's eyes widened, hesitant. Then, slowly, he nodded. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe, even just a little, that a stranger could be kind without needing a reason. In a mall glowing with lights and overwhelmed by holiday pressure, during the heart of shopping season, a boy cast out by his own mother found the rarest thing of all, someone who truly listened. That evening, Clara drove Jason to her small third-floor apartment in an old building on the outskirts of the city. No elevator, but the scent of warm wood and the familiar footsteps of kind neighbors. The car ride was silent. Jason sat in the back seat, clutching his backpack, staring out the window as the streetlights passed like slow, worried heartbeats. Clara didn't ask questions, didn't push. She knew some stories only unfolded with time and patience. When they arrived, she offered a gentle smile. "Up on the third floor, there's cookies and warm milk if you're interested." Jason gave a small nod, more a reflex than a response. But in his eyes, there was a flicker, that fragile space between surprise and hope, as if no adult had ever invited him with such warmth before. Clara's apartment was small, but neat. The hardwood floors showed old scratches. Landscape paintings, all hers, hung on the walls. A moss-green armchair sat by the window, next to a lopsided bookshelf filled with novels, cookbooks, and yellowed letters from years gone by. She warmed the milk and placed a small plate with 3 soft cookies in front of Jason. She said nothing, just returned to the kitchen to wash a few cups. In the quiet, Jason took a cautious bite. Sweet, warm, real. The taste made his eyes sting. Something inside him quietly cracked open. "Do you live here alone?" His voice was barely above a whisper, like he was afraid to shatter the peace. Clara nodded, drying her hands with a towel. "Yes, my husband passed away a long time ago. As for children, I haven't had the chance." She sat across from him. Her voice softened, like she was sharing an old, worn secret. "When I was your age, I ran away once too. My father was strict. My mother, always silent. I just wanted someone to ask, 'Are you okay?' But no one ever did." Jason looked up at her, really looked, for a long time. "Did you go back?" Clara nodded. "Because a friend of my mother's took me in. She didn't ask questions. Just let me sleep one night, gave me a meal and said, 'If you want to stay, tell me in the morning.' And the next morning, I said, 'I want to stay.'" Jason's eyes lit up for a moment, hesitant but shining. "Then, could you?" Clara didn't let him finish. "In the morning, you can tell me that too." Jason didn't reply, but his fingers clutched the mug tightly, like he was trying to hold on to something he hadn't dared believe was real. That night, Clara laid out a blanket for him on the long sofa. She placed a worn picture book beside him. Before turning off the light, she paused at the door and said softly, "If you have a nightmare, call me. I won't mind." Jason nodded slightly, without looking at her. But as Clara closed the door, he kept his eyes on the fading hallway light. And for the first time in weeks, Jason slept, deeply, dreamlessly, unafraid. The next morning, as the early sunlight trickled through the small window, Clara was already awake. She didn't wake Jason. The boy was still curled up on the sofa, blanket half fallen to the floor, his face smudged but peacefully calm. She stood there for a moment, quiet. Then she tiptoed into the kitchen and began brewing coffee, a ritual she hadn't broken in years. Around 7 a.m., the soft shuffle of slippers echoed behind her. "I want to stay." Jason's voice was small, almost a whisper, but enough to make Clara pause mid-pour with the coffee pot. She turned around. "So you've said it now." They both sat at the kitchen table. Clara didn't ask anything else. She handed the boy a slice of toast with peanut butter and a still warm glass of milk. That morning's atmosphere was quiet, cautious, but pleasant, like something fragile was slowly forming between two strangers. But by midday, things began to get complicated. Clara was sorting through old letters in a drawer when the landline rang. The caller ID showed a familiar name, Ellen, a retired social worker Clara had known back when she did community work in her younger days. "Clara, I just saw your name logged at the shopping mall reception desk. Were you there yesterday with a young boy?" Clara's heart seemed to skip a beat. She tightened her grip on the receiver. "What's going on, Ellen?" "There's a report of a missing boy from around that area. His name is Jason R. Carter, 12 years old. Ran away from home nearly 3 weeks ago." Clara sat down, eyes fixed on the living room door where Jason was reading. "I'll call you back," she said quickly, then hung up. That entire afternoon, Clara didn't know what to do. She made another pot of tea, folded a blanket, watered a few succulents, anything she could do to stretch the time to think. Because for the first time in years, she found herself facing a deeply conflicted choice: follow the law or follow her heart. Jason was a runaway, but he was also a kind, intelligent boy who was, quite clearly, scared, not just afraid of being found, but of leaving the only place that had just barely begun to feel like acceptance. By evening, Clara sat down beside Jason as he was rearranging comic books on a shelf. "Do you want to tell me anything?" she asked, her voice gentle and unpressuring. Jason hesitated. Then he spoke haltingly, in fragments, as if each word were a leap over the edge of a cliff. "After my mom died, my dad changed. He didn't hit me, didn't yell, but he also didn't look at me, didn't talk to me. Like I wasn't there. I felt myself disappearing, day by day." Clara held back a sigh. Her heart tightened. "So you ran away?" she asked. Jason nodded. "I just wanted to find a place where someone knew I was there." Silence settled between them. Finally, Clara gently took the boy's hand, firm but soft. "I know you're here now, Jason. And I see you." That night, Clara wrote a letter to the Child Protection Agency. Not to report, not to demand intervention, but a plea: give her more time, 1 week, to help Jason rebuild trust, to prove that adults could be a safe place. 1 week. In that time, she knew she'd be fighting not just the law, but the deep wounds of a child who had once been left behind. The next morning, as Clara was about to brew coffee, the doorbell rang. Not loud, but enough to make her freeze. Jason was on the living room floor, focused on assembling an old model train. When the bell rang, he looked up, his eyes briefly filled with confusion. Clara went to open the door. Standing outside was a tall man, a little over 40. His dark coat was soaked with early morning dew, his eyes sunken and quietly sorrowful. In his hand, he held a crumpled photo, a picture of a boy smiling beside a row of autumn trees. "I'm sorry. I'm Thomas Carter," he said, voice hoarse. "I'm looking for my son, Jason." Clara said nothing. Her heart pounded. She glanced inside. Jason was standing now, frozen, face pale as paper. His eyes locked on the man. No cries, no tears, just a painful tension stretched between their gazes. "You okay?" Clara asked softly. Jason didn't answer. Thomas stepped forward, very slowly, as if afraid he'd scare the boy even more. "Jason," he said, voice trembling, "I'm sorry." Just 3 words, but like a strike through the wall of moss that had built up between father and son. Clara invited Thomas inside. The air in the living room turned thick. No one touched their tea, and no one held eye contact for long. Thomas sat across from his son, hands tightly clasped. "I know you're angry," he began, "and I understand why." Jason lowered his head, voice so quiet it was barely audible. "You don't understand." "Why? Lost your mother?" "But I also lost myself," he continued. "I didn't know how to be a father, especially when the one who was always better at it than me was gone." Jason looked up. His eyes were red. "You didn't hit me. You didn't yell. But you didn't hold me. You didn't ask if I was okay. You weren't there when I needed you." Thomas clenched his hands. "Because I didn't know how to face the pain, so I avoided it. I locked myself in silence." Clara sat still, her heart heavy. She had been a mother. She knew how the space between love and silence could turn into a chasm. Jason trembled as he spoke, I thought. "You forgot me." Thomas froze. His face seemed to crack in that instant. He stood up, walked over, then knelt before his son. Without a word, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thin necklace. "It was your mother's," he said. "She wore it every day. When you ran away, I kept it. Not to forget, but to wait for the moment you were ready to come back." Jason stared at the necklace, his lips pressed tight. Then, as if all the anger, sadness, and longing he'd been holding inside finally broke loose, he threw his arms around his father. There weren't tears at first, just an embrace. Tight, so tight. And in that small room, in the middle of winter, Clara placed a hand over her chest, where she felt warmth for the first time in years. By evening, As the sunset cast a golden hue over the window, Thomas stood up, slowly. "I'm not forcing him to come home," he told Clara. "I'm just asking for a chance to see him, to slowly make things right." Clara nodded. "I believe Jason is learning to forgive. But the greatest kind of forgiveness sometimes begins with an adult admitting they were wrong." Before leaving, Thomas turned back and bowed his head slightly. "Thank you for giving him a home when I couldn't." Clara smiled. "I didn't give him a home. I just opened the door. He's the one who stepped inside." That afternoon, after the sound of Thomas's car faded behind the bend, Clara saw Jason sitting alone on the back steps. He wasn't crying, but his eyes were red. A soft breeze drifted through the porch, carrying the sharp scent of freshly cut grass and the bitter trace of things left unsaid. From behind, Clara approached slowly, holding 2 mugs of hot cocoa. Jason took one without looking up, wrapping both hands tightly around it, as if trying to borrow its warmth to thaw the cold thoughts still swirling inside him. "Do you think I should go?" The question came out softly, as if Jason was asking himself more than anyone else. Clara didn't answer right away. She sat down beside him, her gaze distant. "When my husband died," she began, "my only son left home because he couldn't bear the grief I kept hidden. I didn't try to stop him, because I thought I wasn't good enough to make him stay." Jason turned to look at her, surprised. Clara gave a faint smile. "But then I realized, adults can be wrong too. And young people, if they're brave enough, can choose to stay. Not for the past, but for what they want to build now." That night, Jason sat in his room, his backpack open. On one side were a few old belongings, model trains, books, photos of his mother. On the other, the necklace Thomas had given him its cool metal, holding a memory not yet spoken. He started writing in his notebook, then tore the page out, wrote again, tore it again, until finally, only a small piece of paper remained, neatly placed on the desk. Not many words, but they were real. "Dad, I need time. I don't hate you. I'm just not ready. If you want to start over, I won't run, but I can't leave just yet. There's someone here who taught me how it feels to stay without having to give anything in return." Signed, Jason. The next morning, Clara woke up earlier than usual. Jason wasn't in the kitchen. There were no footsteps. Her heart sank for a moment. Had he left? But then, on the dining table, beside a neatly sliced loaf of bread and a small vase of flowers, she saw the note folded in half, smelling faintly of new paper and something else, the scent of growing up. At the bottom, a final line had been added in different ink. "Miss Clara, thank you for giving me a reason to stay," and a new meaning for the word home. Clara slowly sat down, her hands trembling as she picked up the note. Her heart, once shut tight by loss, now seemed wide open under the morning light. She smiled, not because she had won, not because she had kept someone, but because she understood, sometimes. Love doesn't come from blood, but from the simple choice to stay by each other's side, bound only by kindness. A week after that morning, everything in Clara's small house looked the same, but in truth, much had changed. Jason no longer asked her tentative questions. He started helping sweep leaves in the yard, going to the supermarket with her every Tuesday, and sometimes even biking to the library to pick up books for her. Every evening, before going upstairs, Jason would pause by the old photo frame in the living room. The photo showed a slender woman with bright eyes, his mother. He didn't say anything, but the way his gaze lingered told Clara, this child was learning how to remember his mother in peace. Until one Friday afternoon, when Clara was dusting the bookshelf, the doorbell rang. Jason ran from the kitchen, but when he opened the door, he froze. The man standing at the old wooden gate was none other than Thomas. Gone was the crisp dress shirt or his usual confident eyes. He stood there, his face damp with sweat, holding a wrinkled envelope. "Jason," Thomas said, his voice hoarse. "I got your letter." Jason said nothing. "I've read it over and over all week. So many times I've memorized it." Thomas gave a weak laugh, "And I knew if I didn't come see you now, you might never write another." The boy looked at him for a long moment. There were strands of gray in his hair, dust on his shoes, but in his eyes. For the first time, Jason saw a kind of honesty that wasn't hiding behind anything. Clara stood quietly behind him, saying nothing. She knew some moments were not for adults to interrupt. Jason lowered his head, voice low. "I didn't write the letter so you'd come apologize. I just wanted you to know. I used to feel like I wasn't enough." Thomas nodded, like he had heard those words in his heart many times before. "And I used to think I didn't deserve to be your father," he said, voice breaking. "But if you give me a chance not to fix things, but to start again, then you won't be the only one learning how to forgive." Silence. Long and heavy. Then suddenly Jason stepped forward. No warning, no hesitation. He hugged Thomas. The hug wasn't too tight, nor rushed, but just enough to soothe the years they had lost each other. That evening, the three of them sat around the dinner table. Clara made waffle cookies, Jason poured the cocoa, and Thomas told stories from his days as a music teacher, something Jason had never heard before. Laughter rang out gently, sometimes interrupted by emotion, but no one hid how they felt because here they had learned how to be real. And in a small corner of the living room, Jason's letter remained pressed behind a simple glass frame. With a handwritten line, Clara had added, "Family isn't where we're always right. It's where we're allowed to be wrong, to make things right, and to be loved anyway." On a chilly autumn morning, soft sunlight streamed through the old kitchen window, casting golden stripes like honey across the wooden table. Clara was slicing apples, Jason hunched over, scribbling in a weathered leather-bound notebook, and Thomas was fumbling with a red ribbon around a small box. "What are you doing?" Jason looked up, eyeing his father's clumsy hands with suspicion. Thomas smiled. "It's Miss Clara's birthday today. She didn't say anything, but I saw it in her planner by accident." Jason's eyes lit up. Then he whispered, as if just remembering, "She never celebrates her birthday." "Because she thinks no one remembers," Thomas said quietly. "But today, we'll do it differently." That evening, after a modest dinner of pumpkin soup and toasted bread, Jason led Clara to the back porch, where they had strung a few small lights around the withered grapevine trellis. Nothing flashy, nothing fancy, just a warm glow, enough to see each other in the heart of the night. Thomas placed the small box on the table, and Jason set in front of her a freshly baked apple pie, her favorite. "Miss Clara," Jason began, a little hesitant but sincere, "I don't know how many things you've done for me since I lost my mom, but I think today is the day I should do something small for you." Clara looked around, the warm eyes, the hands that had once reached for each other in panic. These people who were once strangers and now felt like family. She was touched, unsure what to say, as she slowly untied the ribbon and opened the gift box. Inside was an old silver hair clip, polished carefully to shine again. Beneath it was a small card, written by Jason in careful handwriting. "Thank you for being a home. I hope you'll always feel loved, the way you've made me feel." Clara smiled, though the tears had already started falling. She wasn't used to receiving gifts, even less used to people remembering her birthday. But in the soft yellow light of the backyard, she felt young again once more, the center of a family, though none of them shared her blood. She hugged Jason, then Thomas. "Thank you, both of you," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I don't need much. Just this is enough." That night, after Jason had gone to bed, Clara stayed in the living room, still holding the card. She looked out the window, where the little string lights still glowed faintly, and she smiled, because she knew she wasn't alone anymore. On a quiet Saturday afternoon, while Clara was making tea and Jason flipped through a comic by the window, the landline phone rang. That old sound, cold, distant. Clara glanced at the clock. 3:47 p.m. No one ever called at that hour, and especially not on that phone one most had forgotten existed. She wiped her hands on her apron and slowly picked up the receiver. "Hello," her voice steady but cautious. There was a pause on the other end. Then a deep male voice, familiar yet distant, spoke. "Clara, it's me, Richard." Clara gripped the receiver tightly. The sounds of the room faded, giving way to a wave of the past crashing in. Richard, the ex-husband who had vanished from her life over 15 years ago. No explanation, no formal divorce papers. Just disappeared as if he had never existed. "What do you want?" Clara asked, her voice colder than she expected. I heard you're taking care of a child?" he asked. "A boy, named Jason?" Clara's heart skipped a beat. "Where did you hear that?" "I have reason to believe. He's my biological nephew." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Clara glanced over at Jason. The boy was smiling at a comic book, unaware of the storm rolling in. "What are you talking about?" Clara whispered. "Jason is the son of Emily, my sister. She went missing 8 years ago in an accident. My family never found the child." Clara was speechless for several seconds. Her heart felt squeezed. All the vague memories of finding Jason at that shopping center years ago suddenly sharpened with terrifying clarity. "We have a right to know," Richard said, gently but firmly. "I want to meet him." That evening, Clara sat by the fireplace, its glow flickering across her tired face. Jason sat beside her, silent. He had overheard the last part of the call. "Do I have to go, if they're really my family?" Jason asked. The question tore through Clara's heart. She looked him straight in the eyes. "Jason, you are my family. Not because of blood, but because you chose to stay. Because you made this place a home." Jason squeezed her hand. "But if it's true, if I really have relatives, what should I do?" A few days later, Clara and Jason met Richard at a small cafe on the south side of the city. The man, with graying hair and a weathered expression, carried in his eyes a mix of doubt, curiosity, and regret. They talked about Emily, about the accident, about the strange similarities between Jason and the sister he never got to see again. Richard suggested a DNA test. He didn't push, he simply pleaded. "I just want to be sure," he said. "I'm not here to take him away. I just want to know if my sister left something behind, besides grief." A few weeks later, the results came back. Jason was, indeed, Richard's nephew. Clara sat alone in the kitchen when Jason came in. "Grandma," Jason said softly, "I know I have family out there, but I also know more clearly than anything where my heart is." He stepped forward and hugged her, tightly. "I don't have to choose between them and you. But if I had to, I'd still choose to stay." On the Monday morning after Thanksgiving, Clara had just finished washing a pile of dishes when the doorbell rang. A dry, halting sound, unhurried, but enough to make her pause. She dried her hands on an old kitchen towel and went to open the door. On the porch stood a woman in her 40s, wearing a beige overcoat, holding a dark leather purse. Her hair was neatly tied back. Beside her stood a tall man in a wrinkled shirt, his eyes weary. And between them was a boy, about 7, his face far too burdened for his age. Before Clara could speak, the woman addressed her. "You're the one taking care of Jason, correct?" Clara nodded, her eyes fixed on the boy. "I'm his mother." Her voice didn't tremble, but it carried no warmth. Clara clenched the hem of her apron, steadying herself. "Why are you here?" "To take him back." Jason, who had been reading in the next room, heard the unfamiliar voice and came out. When he saw the woman, his face went pale. His eyes widened. He couldn't say a word. "Jason, it's Mommy. Come home with me." The woman bent down and held out her hand. He didn't move, not a twitch. He just looked at Clara as if waiting for her nod, or at least an explanation for why an old nightmare was resurfacing after so many days of peace. "We called child services," the man cut in. "They said without legal paperwork, you can't keep him. I'm Jason's biological father, and this is his mother." Clara felt heat rising to her face. She had thought of this day, the day the past would come knocking. But when it truly arrived, nothing could have prepared her. "Jason," she said, "do you want to go?" Jason shook his head firmly. "No, I'm not going anywhere." The woman frowned. "You don't get to choose." "But he has feelings," Clara replied, her voice sharp. "And those feelings aren't something you get to trample just because of blood." Silence fell. Jason stood there, small and still between the two people who had brought him into the world and the woman who had taught him what love could look like. Then he turned and hugged Clara from behind. "I don't need anyone else. I just need you." The woman stood stunned. The young boy beside her, silent until now, tugged her sleeve and whispered, "Mom, let's go home." Clara stood there, her hand resting lightly on Jason's head. And for the first time, she didn't feel like she was holding on to a child. He was the one holding on to her. With trust, with choice, with a kind of love she had never dared to hope would come back to her. The door closed. No one said another word. Jason looked up at her. "Do I have to leave this place?" Clara knelt, gently touching his shoulder. "No. As long as you choose to stay, this is your home." A week after that tense meeting with Jason's biological parents, no one brought it up again. Not because they had forgotten, but because they understood. What belongs will stay. What doesn't, eventually leaves. That afternoon, the sky was clear and blue, sunlight spreading across the backyard lawn. Clara had just set up the wooden table outside, placing 2 cold lemonades and a plate of oatmeal cookies. Jason sat on the porch steps, sketchbook open on his lap, legs swinging gently, his spirit drifting in its own quiet rhythm. Safe and steady. Clara pulled up a chair beside him, watching his pencil move across the page. He was drawing a small house with a red tile roof and a lush vegetable garden beside it. In front, two figures, one older, one younger, sat together under a tree. She didn't need to ask who they were. "Do you want us to plant a few more rows of carrots this year?" she asked, her voice light as wind. Jason nodded without looking up. "I think the rabbits would really like that." The comment made Clara laugh. It had been a long time since she'd heard Jason joke. "You know." She hesitated, then continued, "There were days when I thought I'd lived nearly my whole life without really understanding what a home was. Until you came." Jason paused for a few seconds, then looked up at her. His dark eyes still carried a seriousness beyond his years, but today, in the soft afternoon light, they glowed with something gentler. "Miss Clara," he said, "when I first got here, I thought I was just staying temporarily, like all the other times. But every time you folded my blanket, every time you refilled my glass before I could ask, I felt like I didn't have to leave anymore." The words made her go still, not just from emotion, but because she understood when a child who grew up between slammed doors, cold dinners, and shouted words could say something like that, it meant healing had begun. Jason turned his notebook around and pointed to the drawing. "See this tree? I want us to plant one like it in the corner of the garden, so when I grow up, I can still sit here with you." Clara nodded, her eyes stinging. "We'll plant it this spring," she replied, "and give it a name. Deal?" Jason smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. Unforced, unarmored. "I want to call it the second tree," he said, "because this is my second life." The afternoon light began to tilt, casting long shadows across the stone path. Nothing more was needed, just a peaceful afternoon, a name for a tree, and one small affirmation. But it was enough for Clara to know Jason was no longer a child running away. He was a child staying to begin again, and to be loved the way he had always deserved. 3 months after Jason named the tree in the garden his second life, Clara's yard looked different. Not just because of the blooming sunflowers or the neat rows of carrots he watered every morning, but because of the air itself. Something invisible, yet unmistakable, the air of a true home. That afternoon, after finishing his math homework and helping Miss Clara wash the dishes, Jason asked if he could go to the neighbor's house, Mr. Douglas's, to watch him fix bicycles. He had grown familiar with the quiet little neighborhood, with neighbors who called him by name, and even the smell of Miss S. Beatrice's apple pie baking every Thursday evening. As Jason stepped out the gate, Clara stood by the window watching him. She didn't call after him, nor offer the same careful instructions as before. It was time she learned to let Jason step into the world, not with fear of being left behind, but with the trust that he would come back. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Clara flinched slightly. No one usually came at this hour. She walked over and opened the door and froze. A woman stood there, thin, her face pale but still bearing traces of a long, faded beauty. Her brown hair hung loose, her eyes sunken, but steady, unflinching. "Are you Clara Hughes?" Clara gave a slight nod. "I'm Jason's mother." The air between them stood still. "Please, may I say a few words?" The woman lowered her voice. "I'm not here to take him back, if that's what you're afraid of. I just need to know that he's okay." Clara said nothing. She looked more closely at the woman standing before her. There was something broken, but not beyond repair. A part of her still holding on, still remorseful. And Clara understood not everyone who lets go does so out of carelessness. Some are simply too shattered to hold on to anything at all. "Jason's not home," Clara said quietly. "Then, could you give him this?" The woman pulled a letter from the pocket of her coat, folded neatly, the paper creased and worn. Clara accepted it, her hand trembling slightly. They stood in silence for a few seconds. I don't dare ask for forgiveness," the woman said as she stepped back. "Just, if he ever wants to know, please tell him I never stopped thinking of him, even if I didn't know how to love him right." Clara nodded, neither promising nor rejecting. The door closed, but it wasn't locked. That night, when Jason returned, sweat on his brow from racing the neighborhood kids, Clara handed him a small towel and the letter. "Someone left this for you. You don't have to read it. It's your choice." Jason looked at the unmarked envelope, with no name, no clues. His hand hesitated. Then slowly, he took it. He didn't open it, just held it. He sat on the sofa, eyes gazing out toward the yard, where the second tree was beginning to grow. Clara didn't say anything. She simply sat beside him. She didn't touch him, didn't prompt him. After a while, Jason spoke, his voice soft but steady. "If I read it, and it hurts, will you still be here?" Clara placed her hand on his. Always. That night, the living room light stayed on late. Jason sat quietly. The letter unfolded before him, his eyes red, but no longer afraid. It wasn't forgiveness yet, and it wasn't forgetting, but it was a beginning, a door left open, no longer needing to be locked. On Sunday morning, the first autumn rain fell lightly across the porch. Drops of water gathered on the window pane, tracing soft curves and blurring the shapes of the trees beyond. In the kitchen, the scent of fresh waffle cookies, mixed with hot coffee, filled the small house warm and quiet like a wordless melody. Jason sat at the dining table, a warm cup of milk held between his hands. His eyes quietly watched the rain outside. The letter from his birth, mother, the woman who once left him in the rain, was now folded carefully, placed in the drawer of his desk. Not forgotten, but kept, as a memory put down properly and in peace. "Miss Clara," Jason spoke softly, "were you ever mad at your mother?" Clara paused as she poured water into the teapot. She turned and looked at him with a calm gaze. "Yes, many times." Jason nodded, as if that was the answer he'd been waiting for. "I think I'm mad at my mom too, but I don't want to hate her." His words made Clara walk over. She pulled out a chair beside him, gently placing her hand over his. "You don't have to choose. Some people we both love and hurt for, and that's enough. That's real." Jason didn't reply, but his small shoulders relaxed. Maybe, for the first time, he no longer felt guilty for remembering his mother. By late morning, the rain had eased. Jason ran out to the backyard, wearing the hand-knit sweater Clara had made for him, long enough to nearly reach his knees. He carried a small trowel and began packing soil around the base of the second tree. It wasn't tall, yet barely reaching Jason's chest, but he cared for it like it was precious, a quiet promise to himself. As the sun peeked through, Clara stepped outside carrying a small wooden box. She handed it to Jason. "For you." He opened it. Inside was a silver necklace, the pendant shaped like a teardrop, engraved with the words, "Braver than you believe." Jason held it, surprised. "I found it among your mother's things," Clara said. "Maybe she wasn't ready to give it to you, but now you're ready to keep it." Jason pressed his lips together and nodded. He bowed his head, and Clara fastened the necklace around his neck. When the cool metal touched his skin, he closed his eyes, as if everything unfinished and painful had just been locked away by a small, quiet clasp. And it held. That afternoon, Clara received a handwritten letter. It was from Jason's mother. It wasn't long. It didn't beg. Just one line. "Thank you for loving my son in the way I didn't know how." Clara folded the letter. She didn't cry, but her heart warmed, as if some circle had finally closed. Night fell. Jason sat by the window reading. Outside, the rain returned soft, thin, like a breath. He looked out to the garden, where the second tree swayed gently in the wind. And he whispered just loud enough for himself to hear, "I'm not running anymore." And in the little house at the end of the street, where a door always stayed slightly ajar, waiting, Jason had grown, not in height, but in heart. A year after that rainy afternoon, the second tree in the backyard had grown almost to Jason's height. Its branches spread wide, lush, and green, having stood firm through its first winter, a testament to something nurtured by trust. Quiet, but enduring. Autumn returned, bringing chilly mornings and the scent of apple pie wafting through the kitchen. Clara still rose early, brewing tea while listening for the thump-thump of Jason's feet running down the stairs. He was no longer groggy like before, his eyes now brighter, his sense of self stronger. This morning was a Saturday, the day Jason officially started the new school year at the local public school. It wasn't big or prestigious, but that had never made Jason feel small. He laced up his old sneakers, slung his backpack full of books over one shoulder, then turned back to Clara. "I'm off." Clara smiled. "You know the way back, right?" Jason shrugged, squinting playfully. "Yeah, but even if I get lost, someone will be waiting for me to come home, right?" She didn't answer, just nodded. A small, steady nod to hold back the tears. The door closed behind him, but something else opened in a way that would never close again. A few weeks later, that woman Jason's birth mother returned. No warning, no flowers, no candles. Just a thinner woman, quieter now, And for the first time in her life, she bowed her head before the wooden gate. Clara wasn't surprised. She simply opened the door, welcomed her in, poured hot tea as if there had never been years of distance between them. No one spoke of what had been lost. They simply sat, face to face, as two mothers walking beside the same child. Jason came downstairs mid-conversation. He froze at the last step. His eyes met his mother's in a moment that had no name. There was no sudden hug, no outburst of blame. Just one sentence, soft, slow, and true. "I'm not mad at you anymore." The woman broke down in tears for the first time in front of her son, and Jason, for the first time, didn't look away. At the end of autumn, Jason stood in the backyard with Clara, where two trees now grew side by side. "Do you think the second tree will grow taller than the first?" he asked. Clara followed his gaze, her eyes glinting behind thin glasses. "Maybe. But what matters is that it's growing in the place it was meant to." Jason nodded. In his hands was a small photo frame inside it, a picture of the three of them, himself, Clara, and his birth mother. Three people, three once disconnected worlds, now joined by one thing: love that was chosen, not forced. From somewhere, a breeze passed through the leaves, carrying the scent of damp earth and the final sunlight of the season. Jason took a deep breath and whispered, like a promise meant only for himself, "I've found home." And you, the reader who stayed with the story until the very last moment, if you were Clara, would you forgive? If you were Jason's mother, would you be brave enough to return? Or if you were Jason himself, would you choose to keep loving or keep holding on to old pain? This story may end here, but the emotions do not. Thank you for staying through a journey of healing, of choice, and of a love that was never perfect, but was always real.